Greetings, traveler of the leaves. Tonight, I'll be your guide on a path that isn't walked with feet, but with the heart. What I'm about to tell you isn't written in the scrolls of the hidden leaf, nor in the elders' archives. It's a story whispered by the wind, held in the silence of those who wait. They speak of a name, Obito Uchiha, the boy who dreamed of being Hokage, the man who lost himself in shadows, the soul who found his way back to light. I see you've arrived with your eyes lowered, like someone who's run too far or lost too much. Maybe you're tired, maybe searching for something you no longer remember by name. So come, sit here with me beneath this old tree where the leaves don't fall. They remember. The ground is soft, the wind is gentle, and for now, the world can wait. Let the words drift slowly like a quiet rain. Here, everything moves with care. Nothing needs to be conquered, only felt, only remembered. Ready? Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and let my voice carry you back to before the pain, to within yourself. Have you ever carried a weight no one could see? Obito knows this feeling well. Tonight, he sits alone on the training ground where it all began, where three children once practiced together under the watchful eye of their sensei. The memorial stone stands before him, cold and silent, bearing names that echo in his heart like distant thunder. He traces the carved letters with his finger, Rin Nohara, and wonders if stones remember the tears that fall upon them. Do they hold the sorrow of every visitor who comes seeking forgiveness? Do they whisper back the words the living cannot say? I'm sorry, he breathes, and the words taste like autumn leaves, brittle, falling, but somehow beautiful in their surrender. He's said these words 1,000 times in his mind, but speaking them aloud feels different. It feels like letting go of something he's held too tightly for too long. The wind moves through the trees, gentle and knowing. It carries with it the scent of rain that hasn't fallen yet, the promise of cleansing that comes after the storm. Obito closes his eyes and lets himself remember, not the pain, not the anger, but the small moments that came before. Rin's laugh when he stumbled over his own feet, Kakashi's barely there smile when they worked together perfectly for the first time, Minato-sensei's proud nod when they completed a mission. What if the heaviest burdens we carry are not the mistakes we've made, but the love we couldn't save? Obito feels this truth settle in his chest, like a smooth stone in still water. He has spent so many years running from this love, calling it weakness, burying it beneath rage and sorrow. But love doesn't die. It just waits, patient as the moon, for us to remember its name. The memorial stone catches the last light of day, and for a moment, it doesn't look like an ending anymore. It looks like a beginning, a place where grief transforms into something softer, where memory becomes a bridge instead of a wall. Obito realizes that he hasn't come here to say goodbye. He's come to remember how to say hello again. He places his palm flat against the stone and feels its coolness seep into his skin. I'm going to be better, he whispers. Not perfect, just better. The stone doesn't answer, but the wind does, brushing against his face like a gentle hand, carrying his words up into the sky, where they can finally rest. In the gathering twilight, Obito sits with his ghosts and finds that they are not haunting him anymore. They are keeping him company, the way old friends do when words aren't necessary. Just presence, just the quiet understanding that some things are too deep for explanation, but not too deep for forgiveness. When he finally stands to leave, his footsteps are lighter. The weight hasn't disappeared. It has simply changed shape, from a chain around his neck to seeds in his pocket, ready to grow into something new when the time is right. Do you know what it's like to look in a mirror and see a stranger? Obito stands before the bathroom mirror in the small apartment he's been given, and the face looking back at him is both familiar and foreign. Half of it bears scars from that day when the world collapsed on top of him, when he thought his story was ending, but it was only beginning to break. He touches the scarred side of his face gently, tracing the lines that map his journey from boy to monster to something in between. These marks tell a story. He's still learning how to read. They speak of pain that ran so deep it changed the very shape of him, but also of survival, of the stubborn way life clings on, even when we beg it to let go. Who are you now? He asks his reflection, and his voice is softer than it used to be. The question hangs in the air like morning mist, neither urgent nor demanding, just curious. Who is Obito Uchiha when he's not running from himself, when he's not wearing the mask of Tobi or the rage of Madara's heir? The mirror shows him a man with tired eyes and gentle hands, someone who has learned that strength sometimes looks like sitting still, like letting tears fall without wiping them away, like saying, "I don't know," instead of pretending to have all the answers. This is not the Hokage he dreamed of becoming as a child, but perhaps it is something more valuable, a human being who has touched the deepest darkness and chosen to return to the light. What if healing isn't about forgetting who we were, but about learning to love all the versions of ourselves? Obito sees the boy in his reflection, eager, clumsy, full of impossible dreams. He sees the broken teenager who couldn't save the girl he loved. He sees the lost man who tried to remake the world because this one hurt too much. And now he sees something new, someone who is learning that broken things can still be beautiful, that scars can be proof of healing instead of evidence of damage. He thinks of Naruto, who looked at him and saw not the villain, but the hurting child underneath. How did that bright-haired boy learn to see so clearly? How did he know that sometimes the most lost people just need someone to believe they can find their way home? The water runs cool over his hands as he splashes his face, and it feels like a small baptism, a quiet promise to start fresh, not to erase the past. That would be impossible, and perhaps even wrong, but to stop letting it be the only story he tells about himself. In the mirror, his reflection nods, as if approving of this decision. The scarred side and the unmarked side work together to create this expression of acceptance, and Obito realizes that he has been trying to hide the wrong thing. He thought he needed to hide his damage, but what he really needed to hide was his fear of being seen. "Hello," he says to his reflection, practicing the word like it's a new jutsu. "My name is Obito, and I'm learning how to live with myself." The words feel strange in his mouth, but not unpleasant, like speaking a language he once knew, but had forgotten, now slowly coming back to him, one syllable at a time. Have you ever written words you knew no one would read? Tonight, Obito sits at a small wooden desk with a piece of paper before him and a pen in his hand that feels heavier than any kunai he's ever held. He's writing letters to the people he's lost, the words he never got to say, floating like fireflies in the darkness of his mind. "Dear Rin," he begins, and then stops. "How do you write to someone who exists only in memory? How do you apologize to the wind? I know you told me to take care of Kakashi," he writes, his handwriting clumsy after years of not forming gentle words. "I know you wanted us to be friends. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember what friendship means. I got lost in the hurt, and I couldn't find my way back to who you believed I could be." The pen moves across the paper like a slow dance, each word a step towards something he can't quite name yet. Peace, maybe, or just the absence of the war that has been raging in his chest for so many years. "I dreamed of you every night," he continues, and his eyes sting with unshed tears. "But the dreams weren't memories anymore. They were nightmares where I couldn't save you, over and over again. I forgot that the real you wouldn't want to be saved if it meant losing myself. You loved the boy who wanted to help everyone. Remember? You loved the boy who was always late because he stopped to help an old woman with her groceries or to rescue a cat from a tree. What if the people we love want us to be happy more than they want us to remember them? This thought sits in Obito's chest like a warm coal, not burning, but glowing softly. Rin wouldn't want him to carry her memory like a weight. She would want him to carry it like a light. He starts a new letter. Dear Kakashi, this one is harder because Kakashi is still alive, still walking the world with his own scars and his own careful distance. I'm sorry I made you suffer for my choices, he writes. I'm sorry I used your guilt against you. I'm sorry I forgot that you lost her too. The words come easier now, flowing like water, finding its path down a mountain. I remember how you used to look at her when you thought no one was watching, like she was sunshine and you were afraid to get too close in case you melted. I was so jealous of that look, but now I think maybe that's what love really is. Not possession, but admiration. Not keeping, but protecting the light in someone else. Page after page, he writes to Minato-sensei, to his grandmother, to the child he used to be. Each letter is a small funeral for the anger he's been carrying, a gentle burial of the resentment that has been eating him alive from the inside. The last letter is the hardest. Dear Obito, how do you forgive yourself? How do you write words of comfort to the person who caused all the pain? You were just a boy who hurt too much, he writes, and the simplicity of it makes him cry. You were just a boy who didn't know how to carry sorrow without letting it poison everything else. You were just a boy who wanted the hurting to stop, even if it meant making the whole world sleep forever. He signs each letter with his name, folds them carefully, and places them in a wooden box that once belonged to his grandmother. These words will never be delivered, but that's not their purpose. They are bridges built in the quiet space of his heart, connecting the islands of his grief until he can walk between them without drowning. When he finally sets down the pen, his hand is cramped, but his chest feels lighter. The letters have taken something from him, not his memories, but the poison that had been seeping into them, making them hurt instead of heal. Do you remember the first time you realized that rain sounds different when you're not afraid of it? Obito sits by his window, watching droplets race each other down the glass, and he thinks about water, how it can drown you or wash you clean, depending on how you meet it. The rain tonight is gentle, the kind that makes soft music on the roof and fills the air with the scent of earth drinking deeply. It reminds him of the first time he ever performed a water jutsu correctly, how Minato-sensei had smiled and said, "Water flows around obstacles, Obito. It doesn't fight them. It finds another way." He hadn't understood then what his teacher was really trying to tell him. He thought strength meant breaking through everything in your path, that power meant never having to bend or change direction. But water is patient. Water is persistent. Water shapes stone, not by force, but by returning again and again until the hardest surfaces become smooth. I tried to be stone, he whispers to the rain. I tried to be so hard that nothing could hurt me anymore, but all I became was brittle. The window is cool against his forehead as he leans into it, watching the storm paint patterns on the world outside. What if the strongest thing you can be is soft enough to change? This thought arrives like the rain itself, quietly, then all at once. Obito thinks of Naruto, who bent but never broke, who absorbed hit after hit and still extended his hand to help the person who had struck him. How does someone learn to be like water when the world keeps trying to turn them into steel? He remembers Rin's voice, how she used to hum while it rained, turning the gray days into something musical. She had a way of finding beauty in the things other people complained about. Mud puddles became mirrors reflecting the sky. Wet leaves became nature's confetti. Storms became lullabies for the earth. Teach me, he says to the memory of her voice. Teach me how to be like rain, how to nourish instead of drown, how to be gentle but persistent, how to wash things clean without destroying them. The rain doesn't answer with words, but it doesn't need to. Its teaching is in its being, how it falls without hesitation, how it gives itself completely to whatever it touches, how it trusts that the earth will know what to do with its gift. Obito opens the window just enough to extend his palm into the storm. The droplets are cool and clean, each one a small blessing on his scarred skin. He used to hate the rain because it reminded him of the day Rin died, the way the water had mixed with his tears until he couldn't tell them apart. But now, he wonders if rain is just the sky crying, and crying is just another way of healing. The water pools in his cupped hand, and he brings it to his lips, tasting the storm. It doesn't taste like sorrow anymore. It tastes like possibility, like the promise that dry seasons don't last forever, that even the hardest ground can soften when it's ready to receive. When he finally closes the window, his hair is damp and his shirt is spotted with moisture, but he feels cleaner than he has in years. The rain has given him something he didn't know he needed: permission to flow instead of fight, to bend instead of break, to trust that finding another way around the obstacles isn't the same as giving up. In the morning, he knows the world will be washed anew, and maybe he will be too. Not perfect, not unmarked, but clean enough to begin again, water-wise and storm-gentle, ready to learn the patient art of shaping stone. Have you ever noticed how life grows in the smallest spaces? Obito kneels in the tiny garden behind his apartment building, his hands deep in dark earth, planting seeds that may never grow into anything beautiful, but deserve the chance anyway. The packet says, "Morning Glories," but the words blur a little in the soft light of dawn. He's never grown anything before. His hands have been too busy destroying, too skilled at taking apart what others had built. But Naruto had pressed these seeds into his palm yesterday with that impossible grin and said, "Even the smallest flower proves the world still believes in beauty." "I don't know what I'm doing," Obito admits to the soil, and somehow this confession feels like the most honest thing he's said in years. He's spent so long pretending to know, pretending to have all the answers, pretending that certainty was the same thing as strength. But here, with dirt under his fingernails and hope trembling in his chest like a newborn bird, he finds comfort in not knowing. What if growing something is the only jutsu that really matters? Not the kind that moves mountains or splits the sky, but the quiet miracle of taking something small and dark and trusting it to find the light. He thinks about the boy he used to be, always rushing, always impatient, wanting to become Hokage immediately, without understanding that leadership grows slowly, like trees, deep roots first, then the reaching towards something higher. That boy would have planted these seeds and expected flowers by evening, would have given up when nothing appeared by morning. But this man, this scarred and patient version of himself, understands something about waiting, about tending, about showing up every day with water and hope, even when there's no sign that anything is happening beneath the surface. Maybe that's what I needed to learn, he says to the morning glories that don't exist yet. Maybe I needed to learn that some of the most important work happens where no one can see it, in the dark, in the quiet, in the space between planting and blooming. The earth is soft and welcoming under his hands, accepting his seeds without judgment, without asking him to prove he deserves to grow something beautiful. It doesn't care about his past, about the years he spent walking in shadows. It only cares that he's here now, willing to dig his hands into the mess and mystery of creation. He waters the planted seeds with careful attention, each drop deliberate and gentle. The water disappears into the soil immediately, leaving no trace except the promise that it will do its work in the darkness, meeting the seeds halfway between earth and sky. I'm going to come back tomorrow, he tells the garden, and it feels like making a promise to himself. And the day after that, and the day after that, even if nothing happens, even if I'm terrible at this, even if I kill every single seed with too much love or not enough patience, what if commitment isn't about succeeding, but about returning, about showing up again and again through the seasons of drought and plenty, through the days when hope feels foolish and the days when it feels inevitable? The sun climbs higher as he works, warming his back and casting long shadows across the tiny garden plot. Other tenants begin to stir in their apartments, and somewhere in the distance, he can hear the village waking up, shopkeepers opening their doors, children laughing on their way to school, the ordinary music of people beginning another day. He belongs to this now, he realizes, not as the boy who dreamed of ruling it, not as the man who tried to destroy it, but as someone who has learned the difference between wanting to control something and wanting to care for it. When he finally stands, brushing the soil from his hands, he leaves a part of himself buried in that small patch of earth. Not the broken parts, those he's learning to heal, but the hopeful parts, the parts that still believe in morning glories and second chances and the patient magic of growing something beautiful from something small. Do you know that silence has its own voice? Obito walks through the forest where Team Minato used to train, and he listens to the conversations that happen without words, the whisper of leaves sharing secrets, the distant song of water over stones, the soft percussion of his footsteps on the moss-covered path. He used to fill every quiet moment with noise, with plans, with the desperate chatter of someone afraid to hear his own thoughts. But silence has taught him things that words never could. It has taught him that healing doesn't always announce itself, that peace often arrives without fanfare, that some of the most important conversations happen in the space between heartbeats. Here, where Kakashi once struggled with the same jutsu, until Minato-sensei helped him understand that power flows better through relaxed hands than clenched fists. Here, where Rin bandaged his scraped knees and teased him about his clumsiness, while her touch was gentle as rain on summer leaves. Here, where he first learned that being part of a team meant something more than just standing next to people. The tree where they carved their names is still here, though the bark has grown around the letters, making them part of the tree's story, instead of just marks upon its surface. Obito traces the faded outline of his own name and wonders if this is what forgiveness looks like. Not erasing the past, but letting it grow into something that nourishes instead of wounds. We were just children, he says to the forest, and his voice is swallowed by the green silence that has been waiting for these words. We were just children who thought we knew what forever meant. What if innocence isn't something you lose, but something that goes underground for a while, like seeds in winter? Obito feels something stirring in his chest, something that has been sleeping for so long he had forgotten it was there. Wonder, maybe, or simply the ability to see the world without the filter of pain and rage that has colored everything for so many years. A bird lands on a branch near his head and regards him with bright, curious eyes. It doesn't know about his past, about the people he's hurt, about the mountains of regret he's been carrying. It sees only a quiet man standing still enough to be trusted, present enough to be real. Hello, he whispers, and the bird tilts its head as if considering his greeting. They stay like this for a long moment, man and bird sharing the same silence, the same small patch of forest, the same willingness to exist without needing to explain themselves. When the bird finally flies away, It doesn't feel like abandonment. It feels like completion, like a conversation that said everything it needed to say without using a single word. Obito understands now why Kakashi reads under trees, why Naruto sometimes just sits on the Hokage monument without speaking. There is wisdom in the quiet spaces, teachings that only come when you're still enough to receive them. He finds a fallen log and sits down, letting the forest enfold him in its ancient patience. Somewhere in the canopy above, leaves rustle with the breath of wind that has been traveling for miles just to reach this moment, this place, this man who is finally ready to listen. The silence isn't empty. It's full of everything he's never let himself hear. The sound of his own breathing, the rhythm of his heart, the soft whisper of blood moving through his veins, the machinery of being alive, the quiet miracle of existing in this body, in this moment, in this world that has somehow found a way to keep him, despite everything. Thank you, he says to the silence, to the forest, to the bird that trusted him enough to come close. Thank you for waiting while I learned how to be quiet enough to hear you. The forest doesn't answer with words, but its response fills the air around him. The sigh of wind through leaves, the distant call of one bird to another, the soft settling of earth under the weight of growing things, the language of silence, spoken fluently by everything that knows how to live without needing to justify its existence. Have you ever stood at the edge of tomorrow and felt afraid of hope? Obito sits on the steps of the academy, watching children file past him with their bright faces and oversized dreams, and he remembers what it felt like to believe that anything was possible. One little girl stumbles on the steps, her books scattering like startled birds. Without thinking, Obito reaches out to help her gather them, and when she looks up at him with big, trusting eyes, he sees himself at that age, clumsy, eager, convinced that becoming a ninja was the most important thing in the world. Thank you, mister, she says, clutching her books to her chest. Are you a ninja too? The question sits in the air between them, like a bridge he's not sure he knows how to cross. What is he now? Not the child who dreamed of being Hokage, not the villain who tried to trap the world in illusion. Something in between, something still becoming. I'm learning to be, he tells her, and the honesty of it surprises him. Every day, I'm learning what that really means. She nods seriously, as if this makes perfect sense to her, and then skips into the building with the resilience of someone who has never learned to doubt that the world will catch her when she falls. What if becoming is never finished? What if even the strongest ninja wake up every morning and have to choose again who they want to be? Obito has spent so much time believing that people were fixed things, that pain changed you permanently, that mistakes marked you forever. But watching these children, he remembers that growing is the most natural thing in the world. He thinks about Naruto, who reinvented himself with every person he saved, who never let his past dictate his possibilities. How did that boy learn to hold his history so lightly, to carry his scars like proof of survival instead of evidence of defeat? Maybe that's the real jutsu, Obito murmurs to himself, learning how to begin again, every morning, every moment, every time someone gives you the chance to be different than you were. A group of students emerges from the building, chattering excitedly about some technique they've just learned. One of them notices Obito and waves, the casual friendliness of someone who sees a stranger and chooses kindness without thinking about it. Obito waves back, and the simple gesture feels like a small revolution in his chest. When was the last time he waved at someone? When was the last time he smiled just because another person smiled first? These tiny interactions, so small they barely register, feel like stepping stones across a river he's been afraid to cross. A teacher walks by, and nods politely. An old man, feeding pigeons in the courtyard, meets his eyes and tips his hat. A young mother, pushing a stroller, says, "Good morning," as she passes. Each small acknowledgement is a vote of confidence in his right to exist in this space, to be part of the ordinary magic of people going about their lives. I don't have to earn this, he realizes, and the thought is so foreign it takes his breath away. I don't have to prove I deserve to exist here. I just have to exist here. I just have to be present and gentle and real. The sun climbs higher, warming the stone steps where he sits. Classes begin inside the academy, and through the windows, he can see children learning the basics. How to throw a kunai, how to form the simplest hand signs, how to fall without getting hurt. The fundamentals that make everything else possible. Maybe that's what he needs to learn too. Not the advanced techniques of redemption or the complex choreography of forgiveness, but the basics. How to wake up without immediately feeling guilty for being alive. How to eat a meal without thinking he doesn't deserve it. How to say hello to a neighbor without wondering if they know who he used to be. The art of beginning again. Practiced one small choice at a time. One conversation, one kindness, one moment of believing that tomorrow might be different than yesterday. Not because he's earned it, but because that's what tomorrows are for. When he finally stands to leave, his reflection in the academy windows shows him something new. Not a man haunted by his past, but a student ready to learn, ready to practice the most difficult jutsu of all, the daily decision to believe in his own capacity to grow. Have you ever noticed that the most important changes happen so quietly you almost miss them? Obito sits in his small apartment as evening falls, and he realizes that somewhere between the morning glories and the letters never sent, between the rain on his window and the bird in the forest, he has become someone he doesn't entirely recognize. Not different. Better? No, that's not right either. More like himself, but without the armor. Himself, but with the volume turned down on the voice that used to whisper that he was irredeemable, unforgivable, too broken to be worth the effort of healing. The apartment is quiet, but it's not the hollow silence of loneliness anymore. It's the full silence of peace, of a man who has learned that solitude and isolation are two very different things. He can be alone without being lonely now, can sit with himself without needing to flee from the conversation. On his small table, there's a letter that arrived this morning from Kakashi. Not many words. That's not his old teammate's way, but enough. I'm glad you're learning to garden. Rin would have liked that. The memorial stone has been getting more visitors lately. I think word is spreading that it's a place for healing, not just remembering. Thank you for that. What if forgiveness isn't a destination, but a way of traveling? Obito folds the letter carefully, placing it next to the wooden box where he keeps the words he wrote to ghosts and to himself. Some conversations happen across years, across the space between what was and what might be, across the careful distance that healing sometimes requires. Through his window, he can see the village settling into evening routines, lights coming on in kitchen windows, families gathering around dinner tables, children being called in from their games, the ordinary miracles of people who have learned to trust in tomorrow enough to make plans for breakfast. He belongs to this now, not as a protector or a destroyer, but as a participant, as someone who stops at the grocery store and exchanges pleasantries with the cashier, who knows his neighbors' names and remembers to water the morning glories, even on the days when hope feels fragile, who has learned that heroism sometimes looks like making tea for yourself and sitting with your thoughts without running away. I'm not the Hokage, he says to the evening air, and for the first time, this doesn't feel like failure. I'm not the boy who wanted to save everyone. I'm not the man who tried to destroy everything. I'm just someone who is learning how to live without needing to be anything more than human. The words settle in his chest like seeds in soil, simple, dark, full of possibility. He thinks about the children at the academy, how they practice the same basic techniques over and over until they become as natural as breathing. Maybe that's what recovery is too. Practicing the fundamentals, being alive until they stop feeling foreign. How to breathe without holding your breath. How to sleep without being afraid of dreams. How to wake up and choose curiosity over dread. How to look in mirrors and see a friend instead of an enemy. How to plant seeds without knowing if they'll grow. How to write letters to the parts of yourself that still hurt. How to sit with rain and let it wash you instead of drown you. A small revolution fought in the quiet territories of daily choice. Victory measured not in the silence of enemies, but in the presence of peace. Not in the absence of pain, but in the willingness to let it transform into something softer. The moon rises outside his window, and Obito realizes he's not afraid of the night anymore. Darkness used to feel like a hiding place where all his worst thoughts could multiply unchallenged, but now it feels like rest, like the natural pause between one day and the next, like the space where growing happens in the quiet hours when no one is watching. He makes tea and sits by the window, watching the village sleep and feeling grateful for the chance to watch over it in this small way, not as a guardian or a savior, but as someone who has learned that love sometimes looks like sitting quietly while the world rests, holding space for the dreams of people who trust tomorrow enough to close their eyes. In the morning, he will water his seeds and check for signs of growth. He will walk to the memorial stone and say hello to the people he carries in his heart. He will practice the daily art of being present in his own life, of believing that he deserves the space he takes up in the world. But tonight, he sits with the peace he has grown slowly, seed by seed, choice by choice, breath by breath, the quiet revolution of a man who has learned that the most radical thing you can do is refuse to let your worst moments be your final word. Outside his window, the village sleeps safely, not because someone is protecting it from dangers, but because healing people help create a healing world, one quiet revolution at a time. And so, traveler of the leaves, our journey through the quiet spaces of the heart comes to its gentle close. You have walked with Obito through the territories of grief and growing, through the patient work of learning to love the person you are instead of only mourning the person you might have been. Perhaps you recognize something of yourself in his story, the weight of carrying what cannot be changed, the courage required to plant seeds in uncertain soil, the quiet triumph of choosing hope, one small decision at a time. Remember this as you return to your own life. Healing is not a destination, but a way of traveling. Peace is not the absence of storms, but the knowledge that you can weather them. And sometimes, the most heroic thing you can do is simply be gentle with yourself while you learn, once again, how to be human. Sleep well, dear traveler. Tomorrow waits with the patience of morning glories, ready to bloom when you are ready to tend them.